Outstanding. Good morning and welcome to the Banking, Commerce, and Insurance Committee. My name is Senator Julie Slama and I represent the 1st Legislative District in far southeast Nebraska. I serve as chair of this committee. The committee will take up bills in the order posted. Our hearing today is your public part of the hearing of the legislative process. This is your opportunity to express your position on the proposed language before us today. Committee members will come and go during the hearing. We have to introduce bills in other committees and are called away for that reason. It's not an indication that we are not interested in the bill being heard. It's just part of the process. To better facilitate today's proceedings, I ask that you abide by the following procedures. The information is posted on the chart by your left. Please silence or turn off your cell phones. Move to the front row when you are ready to testify. The order of testimony will be as follows: introducer, proponents, opponents, neutral, and the close should they choose. Testifiers, please sign in. Hand your pink sign-in sheet to the committee clerk when you come up to testify. Spell your name for the record before you testify. Be concise. It is my request that you limit your testimony to 3 minutes. If you will not be testifying at the microphone but want to go on record as having a position on a bill being heard today, there are white tablets at each entrance where you may leave your name and other pertinent information. These sign-in sheets will become exhibits in the permanent record at the end of today's hearing. Written materials may be distributed to the committee members as exhibits only while testimony is being offered. Hand them to the page for distribution to the committee and staff when you come up to testify. We'll need 10 copies. If you have written testimony but do not have 10 copies, please raise your hand now so that one of our amazing pages can make copies for you. To my immediate right is Committee Counsel Joshua Chrysler. To my left at the end of the table is our committee clerk, Natalie Shunk. The committee members with us today will introduce themselves beginning on my far left.
Elliot Brostar, District 29.
Brad Von Gillen, District 4.
Ray Aguilar, District 35.
Mike Jacobson, District 42.
Kathleen Kapp, District 31.
Bo Ballard, District 21.
George Duncan, District 26.
Also assisting the committee today are the committee pages, Quinn Eilers and Luke McDermott. The committee will take up bills today in the following order: LB 3, LB 113, LB 93, LB 536, and LB 628. And with that, we'll open our hearing on our first bill of the day, LB 3. Senator Sanders, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Chairwoman Slama and the committee members. For the record, my name is Rita Sanders, RITASANDERS. And I represent District 45, which includes much of the Bellevue-Offutt community in eastern Sarpy County. Today I'm introducing LB3 to clean up a bill the legislature passed last year. I'd like to thank the Nebraska Association of County Officials for bringing me this bill. In 2022, I introduced LB 1165. That bill would allow public entities with bond issues that have been approved by the voters to include the bond within the levy prior to the bond being issued. The bill passed the legislature on a consent calendar with no opposition, and it is signed into law on April 18th. As counties begin looking at ways to do this, if you had concerns that some existing laws which allow levies for certain kinds of bonds, quote, as they become due, unquote, might conflict with 1165. LB3 would harmonize those sections. In LB3 would set a deadline for political subdivisions in which voters have approved a bond to notify the county assessor so that the correct valuation be certified in a timely fashion. Last year, a school passed a bond issue on August 9th, and there were delays in reporting it to the assessor. Because the county assessor certified taxable valuations and growth value on or before August 20th of each year, it is difficult to build a new tax district for that bond in that time. LB3 would set a deadline for reporting a bond election to the county assessor that mirrors the deadlines for reporting annexations. August 1st for cities of the metropolitan class and July 1st for other entities. Finally, in section LB3, makes a technical cleanup to reflect the actual practice of the county board rather than the county clerk, levying taxes for bond sinking funds. The county clerk would place this information on the tax roll. Following me are some testifiers who know the bonding process well. I again thank the Nebraska Association of County Officials for catching this issue. I thank the committee for their attention, and I welcome any questions you might have.
Thank you, Senator Sanders. Are there any questions from the committee? See none. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I will waive my closing.
Wonderful.
So I can get back
Thank
to the
you.
Education Committee. Thank you.
All right, we'll now begin taking proponent testimony for LB3.
Good morning,
Good morning.
Chairwoman Slama, members of the Banking Committee. My name is John Cannon. I am the Executive Director of the Nebraska Association of County Officials. You also have heard of us referred to as NACO. Here to testify today in support of LB3. First and foremost, we want to thank Senator Sanders for bringing this bill. We were fully in support of LB 1165 last year. We thought it was a good idea. Frankly, from a taxpayer perspective, when you pass a bond, the ability to actually start collecting and levying for that bond so you can pay it off is going to save the taxpayers just a little bit of money, because that's one extra year of interest payments that you're able to make against interest and principal. However, no good idea goes unpunished. And so last year, as Senator Sanders alluded to, we had a bond election for a school in your district, Senator Slama, and Palmyra Bennett schools on August 9th. The information made its way to the assessor on August 23rd. And the reason these dates are important, I'll get into a little bit of a description of. So when the assessor certifies values, they do so by August 20th of each year, okay? And what then happens is you've got the process where we go through the budgeting process for all of our political subdivisions, and they have until September 30th to file their budget with the state auditor. So we've got a fairly limited window where we're undertaking all these sorts of things. So last year, when the assessor actually did a great job, Chrissy Smallfoot, the assessor in Otoe County, she got her values certified out by August 17th. So she was a little bit early prior to that August 20th date. And she received notice on August 23rd. And so what she had to do was recertify. And I'm not here to say, oh, this was a great injustice that was done. That's not the case. We have computers, we can take care of these sorts of things. But what you have to do is, the way that the property tax system works is, where I live in Lincoln, I don't just have one tax rate that applies to me and everybody else that lives in Lincoln. I've got Lincoln Public Schools, City of Lincoln, Lancaster County, Southeast Community College, I've got NRDs, ESUs, et cetera. And all those different political subdivisions layer, and their levy rates layer, and that comes up with a common levy for me and my property, and actually my wife's property, because the title's in her name. But anyway, at the end of the day, the facts remain that you've got these common tax districts, what we refer to as tax district. That's where the stacking of levies is common in such a way that you've got a common rate. And so essentially, when you add a bond in there, and the bond isn't necessarily for everybody in a particular school district, because it can vary from, there are some bonds that I am not paying on in Lincoln Public Schools, for instance, because of the fact that that's not common. That means you have to build out different tax districts, and that takes just a little bit of time. And as I mentioned, we already have a very narrow window of time between August 20th and September 30th in order for us to have our values certified and then our budgets published. So that takes a little bit of time. That's essentially what we're trying to do, is save on the possibility of having to recertify values, which kind of shrinks that window. And it appears that I'm out of time.
I think we get the general idea. Lesson number one in the legislature is, by the time anybody tells you it's going to be a consent calendar, it won't be, or otherwise you will be stuck in the Banking, Commerce, and Insurance Committee with cleanup bill the next year. So with that, are there any questions from the committee? Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Cannon.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Additional proponent testimony. Good morning.
Good morning, Senator Slama, members of the committee. My name is Lynn Rex, L-Y-N-N-R-E-X, representing the League of Nebraska Municipalities. It's a pleasure to be here today. We appreciate Senator Sanders introducing this bill. Like NACO, the League strongly supported LB 1165. We support this as a clarification, and specifically the last page, which goes through a lot of detail, and this would be on page, what is it here? I should put my glasses on, page 5. But the entire bill, there's a lot of technical cleanup for other things that John's already covered on behalf of NACO, but we think this is an added clarification so that there's no question that by August 20th, that all the assessed property that needs to be there is there. With that, I'm happy to respond to any questions that you might have.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ms. Rex. Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, additional proponent testimony? Any opponent testimony to LB3? Seeing none, any neutral testimony? And with that, Senator Sanders waive closing. For the record, there are no letters for the record on LB3, and this will bring to a close our hearing on LB3 and bring us to Senator McDonnell's LB 113. Good morning, Senator McDonnell.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you, Senator Slama. Members of the committee, my name is Mike McDonnell, McDonnell. I represent Legislative District 5. Legislative Bill 113 would add an additional $21 million to the Nebraska Investment Authority, NIFA, to provide the grants using general fund money to low-income housing developments. The legislature provided additional resources to NIFA just like this last year, and NIFA was able to distribute the money across the state to a number of projects. In those handouts, you'll see by your legislative district some of those projects. Of the financial appropriations allocated the last legislative session, at least 400 plus units have already been awarded grants in addition to another 200 plus units on an average worth of grants that will be obligated by the end of this fiscal year. I'm asking that we continue to move forward and grow the work we set forth to accomplish last year. I envision these grants being utilized in a situation where a development project had previously applied to NIFA, and due to the increased cost of labor and materials, the project no longer meets the financial feasibility standard that NIFA uses. The additional grant money could be used to supplement these projects that were stalled or stopped altogether on this basis and further advance the goal in providing affordable low-income housing. I know this committee, as well as the legislature, will hear a number of proposals as it relates to housing, some of which are broad in scope and others which are narrow. I would suggest that we need to make housing a priority as we move forward with state general fund. And I would propose that the low-income housing developed through NIFA be part of these discussions. Shannon Harner, Executive Director of NIFA, and Tom Stratman, Chief Acquisitions Officer for Midwest Housing Equity Group, will testify following my introduction to explain more about low-income financing projects and answer any technical questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator McDonnell. Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much. We'll now open up proponent testimony for LB 113.
Good morning, Senator
morning.
Slama and members of the committee. My name is Shannon Harner, SHANNON, and I'm the Executive Director of the Nebraska Investment Finance Authority. I'd like to thank Senator McDonnell for bringing this bill. As he noted, NIFA received funding last year in $20.5 million. We were able to allocate those funds by mid-December, and those were allocated to 14 different projects and 696 units. We did have one of those fall out, but it will come back around in this next session. But we anticipate that an additional tranche of funding, so another 21 million, would certainly be fully utilized within our 2023 and 2024 projects with similar results as far as enabling us to move forward with probably close to 700 additional project units. This funding has been critical in ensuring that projects move forward because costs significantly increased. We saw costs increase from between 15 to 30% over the course of 2020 to today. And while we hope that prices are stabilizing, what this means is what this money can mean for us is that we can continue to produce additional units, because as the cost goes up, the allocation of tax credits, specifically on the 9% side, which is a limited amount, then has to go toward the additional costs, reducing the number of units that we can produce. So this type of gap funding would be well utilized. Are there any questions?
Thank you very much. I appreciate your testimony. Are there any questions from the committee? Yes, Senator Kauth.
Thank you, Senator Slama. Is this something that the ARPA funds would go to, or is this because it's being asked for from the general fund, correct?
This would be general fund. The previous tranche was in fact ARPA funding.
And is there no more ARPA funding
It's-
available for it?
right. Yes.
Thank you, Senator Kauth. Any additional questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for being here today.
Good morning, Senator
Good
Slama,
morning.
committee members. My name is Tom Stratman. That's TOMSTRATMAN. I'm the Chief Acquisitions Officer at Midwest Housing Equity Group. Midwest Housing Equity Group is a Nebraska nonprofit corporation formed in 1993 to support the financing and development of affordable housing by investing in affordable housing financed with tax credits. Since inception, we've invested over $750 million in the state, helping finance more than 6,300 units of affordable housing. And we've invested in 50 different counties and 67 different towns across the state. You can see many of our projects on the handouts you were provided. I'm here today to testify in support of LB 113, introduced by Senator McDonnell. LB 113 provides a much needed resource for housing development across our state, and I want to thank Senator McDonnell for sponsoring this important legislation. Nebraska needs more housing. Every study, every interview, town hall meeting indicates we need more housing. No one says we have too much housing. And the positive impacts of quality, affordable housing are many. Good jobs, good schools, good civic activities, and none of that happens if we can't offer safe, quality, affordable homes. So how do we help fix the problem and create more housing and make our communities more viable? By providing additional resources to supplement and leverage existing federal and state programs like the federal and state affordable housing tax credits. LB 113 would allocate $21 million to the Nebraska Investment Finance Authority. The bill further directs NIFA to make grants or loans for the development of affordable housing across Nebraska. These grants must be twinned with federal low-income housing tax credits to create housing. That means that this bill would result in more housing being built across the state. It will result in a multiplier of about 10 to 1 in our estimation. Stated otherwise, the $21 million in this bill should result in the creation of around $200 million in new housing. And this is a win-win scenario. Communities get more housing, tax revenues increase, and the state effectively leverages its resources in an efficient manner. I'll close by saying that we're not reinventing the wheel. NIFA has experience administering federal and state funds in this manner. Specifically, NIFA administered a similar appropriation just last year from the COVID relief funding, the ARPA funds we've just talked about. Previously, it administered 2 federal grant loan programs that were enacted in the wake of the global financial crisis in 2008-2009, the 1602 Credit Exchange Program and the TCAP loan program. Similar to this bill, those programs were also twinned with the LIHTC program that NIFA already administers. In sum, this appropriation leverages existing federal and state resources, is available statewide, and is executed by an entity with demonstrated experience in deploying this type of resource. Thank you for your time and consideration. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stratman. Are there any questions from the committee? Yes, Senator Von Gilleren.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Slama. Mr. Stratman, you had mentioned that 21 million will generate approximately 200 million in new housing. Do all of those go on the tax roll fully loaded?
There's a special assessment for tax credit projects, so they all do go on the tax roll under a tax.
Similar to a market rate unit that goes on for the same value or at a reduced rate?
Typically, it's slightly reduced rate.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Von Gilleren. Are there any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much, Mr. Stratman. Good morning.
Good morning, Senator Slama, members of the committee. My name is Ward F. Hoppe, W-A-R-D, F, H-O-P-P-E. I'm a builder. I build affordable housing across the state. Got some in Valentine, Fremont, Grand Island, Lexington. I've got several projects in Lincoln. And I want to tell you what affordable housing is all about. It's about the putting together a capital stack that allows you to pay for housing where the housing rents that are generated don't amortize the cost. So you got a cost of housing up here. if you run your rent stream, you can pay for this amount. So you got a big difference that you have to come up with to make a project work. When you go after affordable housing, 4% and 9% tax credits are all based on getting allocations of tax credits from NIFA or an allocation of bond capacity from NIFA. 4% is bonds, regular tax credits, and 9% project. When you put those together, you figure out what the different pieces of income or pieces of capital there are to make the stack that pays for the project. When you put together your applications, and applications are awarded once a year now, you're doing it approximately a year ahead of when you get the credits or you make your application. A month or so later, you get an award if you do, and you're good at it. And my company's pretty good at it. And then you're starting construction maybe 4 months later. You actually firm your bids as soon as you know that you got a tax credit award. What I'm telling you is in that process, a year and a half earlier than when you're actually getting the firm bids to build your project, you're estimating it and getting the tax credit awards or filling out what you think is the financial model of your project. Well, it's not perfect. And in that process, what this money that is being asked for in 113 is to give NIFA a pot of money so that if guys like me miss our numbers, we can go back and say, hey, we can't build this unless we get a little bit more. Can you give us some of that money to be that little bit more, to get the project done? Now, I can give you examples. I'm looking like I hope my time's okay. I'm looking at examples we have and how, particularly in the last 2 years, it's been a problem. Gatehouse, Lincoln, over project cost by about $600,000. We cleared that, not by going to NIFA, but we figured out how to get additional basis because of offsite costs. Valentine, $400,000 more than we expected. West Point, $250,000 more than we expected. NIFA bailed us on that. Fremont Omega, 49 units in Grand Island. Both West Point and Fremont Omega are renovations of nursing homes into affordable housing. $750,000 off. Went to NIFA to help us out with that. Those are examples of, we wouldn't have approximately 100 units if we didn't have a way to fill that gap at the end of the road. And that's just the start. I can give you some other examples. In any case, thank you for your time. Having a slush fund at NIFA is important to get deals finished, to get them on the street.
Well, thank you, Mr. Hoppy. I appreciate it and appreciate all the work you do for affordable housing in the state of Nebraska.
Thank you.
Are there any questions from the committee? Senator Jacobson.
Mr. Hoppy, I guess the question I'd have is, I recognize, particularly given the pandemic, we saw almost every builder really run into problems because they grossly underestimated cost of construction, cost of materials, delays in materials,
Yes, sir.
labor costs, all of those things. And so we've seen that exacerbated over the last couple of years. As we move into what might be more of a normalized environment, do you anticipate that we're still going to have these kinds of misses on your initial estimates versus the time you get the construction done, or how do you see that improving into the future?
Well, I think supply is going to improve, so that's going to make a difference. It was just hard to tell what was going to go up in the last 24 months. Pipe went up insane. We haven't been able to get electrical stuff. We're still on
And I
that, so,
recognize all that.
yeah.
I guess my question really kind of is driven more towards the idea that we're asking for this additional funding now. Do we see that coming to an end, that we're really trying to bring a fix to where we're in the environment we're in now? Do we see this going to be more of a normalized environment, or are we expecting this is going to be an ongoing thing that's going to go on into the future, even once we see the labor markets and the supply chains get back?
I think it'll stabilize, Senator.
Okay, thank you.
I think it's going to stabilize as far as production. One of the interest rates have really kick starts in the teeth. So we're looking at the market rate things and has slowed down. And I think we're going to get some stability in supply and labor.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Jacobson. Additional questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much, Mr.
Thank
Hoppy.
you.
Good morning.
Good morning, Chairperson Slama and members of the committee. My name is Carol Bodine, and that's CarolBodeen. I'm the Director of Policy and Outreach for the Nebraska Housing Developers Association, and I'm here today in support of LB 113. We thank Senator McDonnell for bringing this in legislation. We are a statewide organization. We represent over 70 members, and including 2 that just testified for you, from across the state. Our mission is simple. It's to champion affordable housing. It's our goal that Nebraskans of every income have the cornerstone foundation of a healthy and affordable home. Our members include both nonprofit and for-profit developers and organizations. We express our support for LB 113, the bill to appropriate $21 million to facilitate the Nebraska Investment Finance Authority in developing the affordable rental housing for low-income families via the use of the tax credits. It's becoming a bit of a broken record, but it is well documented that all types of housing are needed, and badly so, and especially so for our lower income. We feel like this is a very valuable tool in developing these needed properties, and we express our support and ask that you advance this legislation.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bodine. Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much for being here today.
Very welcome.
Good morning.
Morning. Chairwoman Slama and members of the committee, my name is Justin Brady, JUSTIN BRADY. I appear before you today as the registered lobbyist for the Nebraska Realtors Association, for the Metro Omaha Builders Association, for the Home Builders Association of Lincoln, and the State Home Builders Association. Also, for full disclosure, we do work with Midwest Housing Equity Group, who you heard from Tom earlier. And instead of going through my testimony, which you've heard from everybody, I thought I would address some of the questions and things that had come up. For Senator Van Gillen, you'd asked about the tax rate. It doesn't go on at 100% market rate because the agreement with these projects, a lot of them are, they agree either for 15 or 30 years to set the rate at a lower rent than what the market is. So there is a formula that these projects go through. The county sits on it, developers sit on it, the state sits on this committee to set the tax rate. So they do go on the tax rolls, but not at a market rate because they aren't able to charge a market rate rent. Senator Kauth, as far as the ARPA dollars, yes, last time they were ARPA dollars. And in all honesty, working with Senator McDonnell's office, we made the request to do them ARPA dollars again. Bill drafters said that since all the ARPA dollars are technically allocated and their balance sheet shows 0, we needed to come in at general funds. If this committee would feel the need to say, hey, the way we feel comfortable moving it forward is to put it on the ARPA dollars, knowing that or assuming that there's going to be ARPA dollars still available. I can tell you at least the people we work with, you'd have to check with Senator McDonnell, but the people we work with are perfectly fine with that because we do see it, Senator, as more of a short-term deal to get this done. As Mr. Hoppy spoke, the market's stabilizing. Yes, stabilizing at a higher number, but at least now they know what they have to hit. And then finally, I'd just leave with you, like it was said, you're going to have lots of housing bills, lots of discussion on what do we do for housing. I would say that this program through NIFA really does give a huge return on your investment. Not that other programs aren't great, but I think a lot of programs you look at and you say the state's going to go spend $1 and they get $1 worth of house out of it. As you've heard here, you're going to potentially spend $21 million and get tenfold that in housing. So I'd say as a return on investment of the state tax dollars, it's a very well-run program that should be considered. So with that, I'll try to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brady. Are there any committee questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, additional proponent testimony for LB 113. Seeing none, is anyone here to testify in opposition to LB 113? Seeing none, anyone wishing to testify in the neutral position? Seeing none, Senator McDonnell, you're welcome to close. And as you're approaching, we have 2 letters for the record on LB 113, both proponents.
Unless you have questions, I'm going to leave.
Outstanding. Do we have any committee questions?
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator McDonnell. That brings
See you
to,
this afternoon.
we will see you this afternoon, I think, for a while. All right, that brings to a close our hearing on LB 113. And with that, I'll turn things over to my esteemed Vice Chairman, Senator Jacobson, and we'll turn to LB 93.
Okay, thank you, Chairperson Slama. And we will now move to LB 93. And that will be, the open will come from Senator Slama.
Good morning, members of the committee. My name is Julie Slama, Julie-Slama, and I represent District 1 in Southeast Nebraska. Today, I'm here to introduce LB 93. This bill would amend Nebraska Revised Statutes, Chapter 44 in a few different places. These statutes require mandatory security deposits to be made to the Department of Insurance by domestic insurers, non-exempt domestic assessment associations, foreign insurers and assessment associations, and insurers dealing in legal expense insurance. Under current law, those named categories of insurers can only name policyholders as beneficiaries of mandatory security deposits. LB 93 would make it so that those insurers could name either just policyholders or both policyholders and creditors as the beneficiaries of mandatory security deposits. These security deposits are required by states on a retaliatory basis, and states will often admit a company if they have made a deposit for the same purpose in another state. The issue in matching the purposes for the deposits is that there are some states that say these deposits must be for the benefit of all policyholders, and there are other states that say the deposits must be for the benefits of creditors and policyholders. Changing our language to policyholders or policyholders and creditors allows a deposit to be made with us to satisfy those other state requirements, and also means if a foreign insurer who wishes to do business in Nebraska has made a deposit in another state already, that deposit would satisfy our requirements and they would not need to make another. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions, although there are people behind me who are far more well qualified to testify on this than I am.
Questions from the committee? If not, thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Slama. I will now ask for proponents of the bill.
Good morning, Mr. Vice Chairman and members of the Banking, Commerce, and Insurance Committee. My name is Eric Dunning. For the record, that's spelled E-R-I-C-D-U-N-N-I-N-G. I'm the Director of Insurance, here to testify in support of LB 93. First, I'd like to begin by thanking Senator Slama for introducing this bill and working with the department to make sure that this occurred. LB 93 allows the security deposits that insurers maintain with the department to be made for the benefit of policyholders or policyholders and creditors. Again, just to double down on what Senator Slama said, the deposits are required by states in order to do business. In many of those states, there's a discrepancy between who those deposits are held for, either the policyholders and creditors, or the policyholders. And so when insurers come in and say, well, I have this deposit established for the creditors or the policyholders and creditors, it doesn't work for us. So it ends up with a significant amount of bureaucratic paper shuffling on this. This will be a cleanup change to the Nebraska revised statutes and should make it easier both for insurers to do business in the state and for the Department of Insurance as it administers a deposit, which is currently set at $100,000, by the way. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions, Mr. Dunning? No, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, sir.
Other proponents?
Good morning. Vice Chairman Jacobson and members of the Banking, Commerce, and Insurance Committee. My name is Robert M. Bell. Last name is spelled B-E-L-L. I am the Executive Director and Registered Lobbyist for the Nebraska Insurance Federation. I'm here today to testify in support of LB 93. The Nebraska Insurance Federation is a state trade association of insurance companies. The Federation currently has over 40 member insurance companies. Members of the Federation include companies who write all lines of insurance and who provide over 16,000 jobs to the Nebraska economy and over $14 billion of economic impact to the state on an annual basis. Perhaps most importantly, Nebraska Insurance Federation members provide high-value quality insurance products that protect Nebraskans during difficult times. As you've already heard, LB 93 would update the statutory deposit statutes to add the term creditors to the various statutes that describe whom the deposit is held for in case of a failure of an insurer to fulfill its obligations. My understanding is that this update will more closely align the Nebraska law to other state laws and prevent unnecessary retaliatory actions on an insurer by another state, such as requiring another statutory deposit. Of course, the member companies of the Federation would support such a change. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today to testify in support. Thank you.
Questions from the committee? All right, seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
You're welcome.
Further proponents? Seeing none, those wishing to speak in opposition to the bill? Seeing none, those wishing to speak in a neutral capacity? Seeing none, Senator Slama, you wish to close? Senator Slama waives closing. We'll close the public hearing on LB 93 and we'll move on to open the public hearing for LB 536. Also, Senator Slama.
Outstanding. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Julie Slama, Julie Slama, and I represent District 1 in Southeast Nebraska. Today, I'm here to introduce LB 536. I was asked to introduce LB 536 by the Nebraska Insurance Federation. LB 536 updates two provisions of the Insurers Investment Act, an act whose purpose is, as stated in Nebraska Revised Statutes 44-5103, to protect and further the interests of policyholders, claimants, creditors, and the general public by establishing standards, requirements, and limitations for the investments of insurers doing business in this state. Such standards, requirements, and limitations are intended to promote solvency, investment yield and growth, investment diversification, investment value stability, and liquidity to meet business needs. LB 536 amends provisions related to an insurer's investments in both preferred stock and common stock by eliminating retained earnings qualifications for both types of investments. As corporate practices have changed, retained earnings are not necessarily a good indication of whether or not an investment in a corporate stock is a sound investment. This change will match the current state law in most other jurisdictions and will provide domestic insurers more flexibility. I know members of the insurance industry are behind me to provide more detail on LB 536. Thank you for your time, and I'd be happy to attempt to answer any questions you may have.
Questions for Senator Slama?
Thank you.
Seeing none, thank you. I'll ask for those wishing to speak in support of the bill.
Good morning again. Vice Chairman Jacobson and members of the Banking, Commerce, and Insurance Committee. My name is Robert M. Bell. Last name is spelled B-E-L-L. I'm the Executive Director and Registered Lobbyist for the Nebraska Insurance Federation. I am here today to testify in support of LB 536. And thank you to Chairwoman Slama for introducing LB 536 on behalf of the Federation. As you know, the Nebraska Insurance Federation is a state trade association of insurance companies. Many of those companies are, of course, domestic insurance companies who have their primary license in the state of Nebraska. And that is who the Insurer Investment Act applies to. The act establishes the rules of how Nebraska insurers invest their assets, and it is a tool the Department of Insurance utilizes in determining whether or not such assets are allowed or admitted. The act seeks to balance the protections of the consumer with the ability of insurance companies to have successful investments. Essentially, the act lists the types of investments that are permitted if an asset is to be considered admitted for the purposes of a financial solvency examination by the department. Last session, the legislature updated the act to modernize provisions, and the Nebraska insurance industry certainly appreciates the willingness of the legislature and the Nebraska Department of Insurance for working with industry to provide that needed modernization. One item that the industry missed is the issue before you today, and that one is related to retained earnings. Corporate practices have changed in the past 30 years since the act was first adopted, and the qualifications related to retained earnings of a corporation are not particularly illustrative of financial strength of a corporation. Particularly as of late, many corporations with high equity and market caps have been buying back stocks and flipping their retained earnings to negative. This accounting practice has no actual impact on whether or not an insurance company should invest in that stock. Under current law, an insurance company could not purchase either common stock or preferred stock that has less than $1 million in retained earnings. LB 536 eliminates this retained earnings requirement and will provide insurers more flexibility in their investment in stocks. With that, I will end my testimony. Appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today in support of LB 536.
Question for Mr. Bell? Senator Bostar.
Thank you, Senator Jacobson, and thank you, Mr. Bell.
Of course.
This seems like a pretty straightforward bill. We're providing just more flexibility to allow these institutions to make investment decisions. Is that my understanding?
Yes, within the framework of the act that as it exists.
Sure, but
today. So
we're making it,
yeah,
we're reducing restrictions.
we are.
Should we be concerned that companies within your industry can make these decisions? Can you be trusted to determine how to invest your money? Or should the state help you in deciding how that should work?
Well, two answers to that two-part question is that yes, you should trust insurance companies to make good investments. But two, the Department of Insurance also reviews these investments to make sure that they are that insurance companies are able to fulfill their promises of paying out for policyholders when necessary. So, the legislature has established the rules of how an insurance company can invest its quote admitted assets, and then the Department of Insurance reviews those filings when they're made with the department to review and make sure those investments are solid. And if there's a question that comes up that a domestic insurer has weighted itself outside the law or perhaps made a bad decision related to an investment, they will be in touch.
Well, I appreciate your answer and I appreciate this legislation because I do trust our insurance companies to be able to make these decisions.
Well, I appreciate your trust. Thank you,
Thank you.
Senator Bostar.
That's Senator Von Giller.
Thank you, Senator Jacobson. Mr. Bell, just a quick accounting lesson for me. I'll admit others I had peers that scored better in accounting than I did, so help me out here. How can we have a company that's considered fiscally sound investment that has negative retained earnings? What other assets are on the balance sheet that give confidence to an investor?
I mean, it could be any different type of assets that are on there. So I think the primary example, I think lately many tech companies in particular that have high valuation and high market cap have been buying back their own stock. And what that essentially does is that flips their retained earnings. And so retained earnings is usually an indication of profit of some sort, right? But you may, as a corporation, decide to buy back stock, as an example, or make other investments within your assets that will lower your retained earnings into to a point of negative retained earnings. And we really don't feel like that's necessarily all that illustrative of whether or not it is a sound corporation to invest in. And so I think that's why we've seen so many other states not have this requirement in their insurer investment code. And so on a situation, let's say Alphabet, I believe that might be a corporation that has negative retained earnings right now, but has high market cap, right? And, you know, if you had it in your portfolio and they decided to do a huge buyback, you're still fine. It's really this law relates to the moment of purchase of that stock. So, but let's say in 2022, before new federal tax laws go into place, they decide to do a huge buyback and flip their retained earnings for 2022. Well, you're going to have a certain amount of time you're not going to be able to invest in Alphabet until their retained earnings go back to positive, if in fact they ever do. But so I guess that would be one example.
Yeah. So and maybe the offset would be a high level of working capital that
Right.
gives the company operational cash and secures their operations, even though their retained earnings have been depleted.
Yes, you said that much better than I did.
All right.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. All right. Thanks.
Yep. You're welcome.
Further questions? If not, thank you for your testimony.
You're welcome.
Other proponents?
Good morning, Vice Chair Jacobson, members of the Banking, Commerce, and Insurance Committee. My name is Brennan Neville, spelled BRENNAN, NEVILLE. I am Assistant General Counsel at National Indemnity Company, and I'm here to speak on behalf of LB 536, on behalf of National Indemnity and its approximately 25 Nebraska domiciled affiliated insurers in the Berkshire Hathaway organization. National Indemnity and its affiliates invest in the common stock of a number of large publicly traded corporations. The Insurers Investment Act, Section 44-5141, permits these investments to be treated as admitted assets on the books of these insurers, provided the corporations have retained earnings in excess of $1 million. Section 44-5140 contains a similar provision for investments in preferred stock. We believe that the retained earnings requirement is no longer relevant to the question of whether an equity investment is a sound asset for purposes of measuring the solvency and soundness of an insurance company. For example, one of the most valuable and largest companies in America today is Apple. As a result of last year's stock buybacks and dividend payments, however, Apple presently has negative retained earnings. Other well-known companies in this situation include Ally Financial, HP, T-Mobile US, to name just a few. This quirk in the accounting rules doesn't impact the value of the stock of these companies as being a sound investment whose market value can be readily ascertained. However, as the Insurers Investment Act is presently drafted, any new investments that our insurers would make in these companies would not qualify as an admitted asset on our financial statements. Presently, this is not a concern for National Indemnity specifically, as it has a very large basket clause in which additional investments in these securities would be counted. However, other smaller insurers in our organization have smaller basket clause capacity and therefore could be required to non-admit new investments in financially sound and successful companies merely because these companies don't presently report retained earnings under US GAAP accounting standards. Now, as has been mentioned before, most other states do not have a requirement like this, and the National Association of Insurance Commissioners Model Act doesn't contain such a requirement. So we believe that removing this language that requires retained earnings for both common stock and preferred stock investments would allow our companies to continue to invest in large, well-run, publicly traded companies without risk of these investments having to be non-admitted. Thank you.
Questions, Mr. Neville? Yes. Senator
Mr.
Malley.
Vice Chairman. Are insurance companies required to disclose who they're invested in, or even if a policyholder requests it?
Our financial statements are publicly filed with the insurance department.
Perfect, thank you.
Further questions? If not, thank you for your testimony. Further proponents?
Good morning, Mr. Vice Chairman and members of the Banking, Commerce, and Insurance Committee. My name is Eric Dunning. For the record, that's spelled ERICDUNNING. I'm the Director of Insurance here to testify in support of LB 536. I think you've got a good description of the bill and the intents behind the bill. The Department of Insurance is here to merely add to the record that we have reviewed this change and we are comfortable with it. And we do not believe that eliminating these requirements is going to cause financial harm to insureds. And for this reason, we support the changes proposed by LB 536.
Thank you, Mr. Dunning. Questions for Mr. Dunning? If not, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, Senator.
Any further proponents wishing to speak as a proponent? If not, anyone wishing to speak as an opponent? Seeing none, anyone wishing to speak in a neutral capacity? Seeing none, Senator Slama, do you wish to close? Senator Slama waives closing. And with that, we'll close the public hearing on LB 536, and I'll turn the chair back to Senator Slama.
Thank you very much, Vice Chairman Jacobson. We'll now open up the hearing on Vice Chairman Jacobson's LB 628. Good morning.
Good morning, Chairwoman Slama and members of the Banking, Commerce, and Insurance Committee. My name is Senator Mike Jacobson, Mikejacobson. I'm appearing before you this morning to present LB 628. LB 628 was requested by the Secretary of State's office. The bill does not make any changes for CPAs, but the intent of the legislation is to bring clarity to the definition of professional services for LLCs. Several years ago, 2012, the PC statutes were amended to specifically enumerate the limited number of professionals that form professional corporations. However, the limited liability company statutes were not similarly amended, which has led to some confusion in this area. In this proposed legislation, the bill will modify the definition of professional services in the LLC statutes to be consistent with the definition of the professional corporation statutes and make a few other changes to the statutes related to professional services. The bill added a grandfather clause so that LLCs that don't want to make a change are not required to do so. The other changes can be summarized as follows. Number one, cleanup of the use of ancillary services in the LLC professional entity statutes. Number two, recognize outside certifying organizations or compacts recognized by the regulatory body. This is applicable to some health professionals. Number three, requiring regulatory bodies to use the electronic access process for verifying licensure to work with the Office of the Secretary of State to create an automated process for the Secretary of State's office to electronically access and verify the licensing records. And finally, strike the requirements for the professional to list their residence address in the filing with the Secretary of State's office. Many professionals prefer not to use their home address on a public filing record. There is also an amendment that is just modifies a few words, will be distributed as well. But again, this is all technical changes to this these statutes. I do have professionals that are going to speak behind me that are very, very well knowledgeable in this and know all the ins and outs. And so I would defer to any questions, but I would ask you to strongly consider asking them the technical questions.
All right, sorry. Thank you, Senator Jacobson. Are there any questions for our Vice Chairman? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll now open up proponent testimony for LB 628. Good morning.
Good morning. For the record, my name is Colleen Bialik. It's COLLEENBYELICK. I'm the Chief Deputy and General Counsel for the Secretary of State's office here on behalf of Secretary of State Bob Ebden in support of this bill. I'd like to thank Senator Jacobson for introducing this legislation on behalf of the Secretary of State's office. As you probably know, the Secretary of State's office files a variety of business documents, including documents related to professional corporations and limited liability companies. This bill focuses on those persons forming LLCs to render professional services. These businesses are often referred to informally as professional LLCs. This bill originated from an internal review of some of our practices related to professional LLCs. We realized that there were some areas of the law that needed clarification and updating. The first area we identified was the definition of professional services. When an LLC renders professional services, there are additional requirements that they have to follow. They have to get a certificate from their regulating board to determine that the individuals rendering the services are appropriately licensed or authorized to render the service. The certificate is then filed with the Secretary of State's office at the time that they form their business and annually thereafter. An alternative process exists if the records of the board are available electronically. The list of individuals rendering the professional services are submitted to the Secretary of State, and then the Secretary of State's office verifies that the individuals are appropriately licensed. This is primarily used for medical professionals. This bill changes the list of individuals subject to this certificate process. The list of professionals is already included in the definition. However, the definition has this very broad catch-all phrase that includes anyone who must obtain a license or other authorization prior to rendering personal service. Our concern is that if you take this language to its full extent, it includes things not traditionally considered professional corporations, such as a nail tech or a cosmetologist, a barber, tattoo artist, and others. And we don't believe that these types of occupations were intended to be professional corporations. Additionally, as previously mentioned, similar language was previously included in the professional corporation statutes, and that language was removed in 2012. We believe that having consistency between these two acts is important and brings clarity to those forming businesses and clarity to our office. This also bill clarifies that when we're checking licensing records, again, this is primarily for health professionals, that we can look at other compacts or organizations that are recognized by the regulatory body. So in some cases, the Department of Health and Human Services recognizes a compact as being the sort of licensing source for that profession. And so we need to be able to check those records when we're verifying licensure. Additionally, this allows us to work with regulatory bodies that want to use this electronic process to help automate the process. This is an area that is a manual process for our staff, and it's very time consuming, and we would like to automate these processes further. Finally, there's some cleanup language related to ancillary services. This is just harmonizing some existing statutory legislation. Thank you for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bialik. Are there any questions from the committee? Yes, Senator Bosar.
Thank you, Chair Slama. Thank you, ma'am.
Yes.
On page 11 of the bill, actually line 11, where you strike residence as
Yes.
it relates to addresses.
Yes.
So instead of it being residence address, it would read,
Provided.
which certificate shall set forth the name and addresses of all shareholders on the last day of the month. What address are they expected to then provide?
I would expect that they would provide their business address.
Okay, and so that would be acceptable.
That would be sufficient for our purposes, and I think for the regulatory board as well, if they're issuing the certificate, or for our purposes, if we're looking the individual up, generally, we're looking at their name and license number.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Senator Boster. Any additional questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good morning,
Good morning.
Chairwoman Slama and committee members. My name is Joe Higgins, Joehuigens. I'm an attorney at Coley Justin in Omaha, Nebraska. I'm here on behalf of the Nebraska State Bar Association in support of LB 628. And more specifically, I'm here to offer some comments on the amendments proposed to the legislation. The substance of our modest amendments to the bill is found primarily in Section 1 with respect to revised statute Section 21102, subparagraph 2B, where we would propose to add, strictly as clarifying language, the phrase "of those," such that subparagraph 2B would read, verification that all of those members, managers, professional employees, and agents who are required by law to do so are duly licensed or otherwise legally authorized to render the professional service for which the limited liability company is organized to do business, and so on and so on. That same "of those" clarifying language appears elsewhere in the bill where appropriate in context. It's basically where the same concept is embedded in the Nebraska statutes. Although that addition is perhaps not strictly necessary and does not materially alter the bill, we propose it nevertheless. Our purpose is simply to provide clarifying language that the requirement for licensure verification applies only with respect to those members, managers, etc., of a company who are required by law to be licensed to render the professional service for which that company is formed. The addition does not change existing law, nor does it change the intended effect of the bill. Rather, it assists lawyers like me who have frequent occasion to interpret the statute and explain its import to clients considering whether to form a limited liability company for a professional service. Given the bill's effect of conforming the definition of professional service for purposes of the LLC statutes to the definition of professional service applied with respect to professional corporations, and in light of the nuances between the rules applied to professional corporations and those applied to limited liability companies, I think such clarifying language is pragmatic, and I appreciate you considering the change. In Section 3 of the bill regarding revised statute, Section 21186, subsection 2, the third paragraph at line 22, applicant should be replaced with limited liability company, as the requirement for the Secretary of State to verify licensure extends beyond the initial LLC application to the annual updates that are contemplated above in lines 13 and 14. In Section 5 of the bill regarding revised statute, Section 212202, subsection 3, in light of the purpose of the bill to make identical the definition of professional service under the corporation statutes and the limited liability company statutes, we would propose minor revisions such that the language in subsection 3 mirrors verbatim that to be adopted in Section 21-102, subsection 18. If ever this committee should decide to undertake a more in-depth analysis and review of our Nebraska statutes as they apply to professional corporations and limited liability companies that render a professional service, please do not hesitate to solicit my involvement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Higgins. We appreciate the clarifying language in the amendment.
Thank you.
Any questions from the committee? Wonderful. Thank you very much for being here today. Additional proponent testimony for LB 628. Anyone here to testify in opposition to LB 628? Seeing none, any neutral testimony? Seeing none, there are no letters for the record on LB 628. Senator Jacobson waives closing. That brings to an end the hearing on LB 628 and our hearings for the day. If everyone could stick around just momentarily, I think